Very good evening, everybody. Thank you all very much indeed for coming. Welcome to the March edition of Scrutiny, where we've got the business plan, the integrated care strategy, and the integrated performance report for consideration. So first up, apologies. Is anybody aware of any apologies that haven't been notified in advance? Don't see any, okay. Does anybody wish to make any declarations of interest about anything that's going on in this meeting, bearing in mind that item 6 concerns everything the council does? Also see none, which is troubling, considering that remark. Okay, chair's announcements. I have nothing particular to announce at this point. So we move on to the minutes. Would anybody like to make any remarks about the draft minutes from our meeting of the 1st of February? Also don't see anything on that, so thank you. In which case we'll move on to the work plan and forward plan. So one thing to say here is that the lineup for what would be April cabinet is currently looking fairly light on things that well, entirely light, like zero weight, in terms of things that Scrutiny would, generally speaking, have a session about. They're all sort of more small-scale administrative things. So what I suggest we do on that is if we keep that date, which is the cabinet's on the 19th, so what's the date of the Scrutiny meeting? You know. The 4th, yes. So we keep the date of the 4th of April notionally in the calendar for the time being, but it's likely that that would get cancelled for not having any business to consider at that scrutiny. And if that's the case, we'll look to do that about 2 weeks out or so, just to give us wiggle room in case the cabinet agenda gets moved around or anything like that, and things do come up that we want to look at. So probably expect that 4th of April date not to happen, but that will be followed up in, I guess that's about almost exactly 4 weeks today. So that'll be followed up about 2 weeks today. So watch your emails for updates on that one. All right, good evening. Okay, that is all the admin stuff. So we can move straight on to the first item of business, which is the update of the council's business plan. We've got the leader of the council, Councillor Brown, and we've also got Ms. Challa attending as well to answer questions about that one. So, leader, would you like to kick us off and introduce the item?
Thanks very much, Chair. So this is, I think, my 4th year of doing this. It's certainly the 4th year of the business plan. And so hopefully people are relatively familiar with both the format and the content of the strategy that the business plan is built on. So for a start, and I've actually got a paper copy of it here with me because I am that sad sometimes that I have to have things in paper. But I mean, just a reminder that our whole business plan and corporate strategy is based on our 4 priorities, which, to remind you all, are to pursue a zero carbon Oxford, to support thriving communities, to deliver more affordable housing, and to enable an inclusive economy. And so the business plan divides itself up into those 4 sections with this year's priorities for delivery in each of those areas. And as Mish was just reminding me, there is often some chatter about, oh, is this one in the right section? Could it not be in another section? And I think the answer to that is these are all very interconnecting priorities. And if they're in the business plan, they'll be delivered. And that's the important thing, not where they sit in the business plan, because there are a number which could, frankly, sit under lots of different priorities. And that's the whole point, really, is that, you know, we hope we have a coherent strategy for the city, and this is about delivering it. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good things, I think, both in terms of the update from last year, in terms of the progress that we've made, So just to pick out a few, because there are an awful lot, so I'm not going to run through all of them. For instance, I think it's really good news that social value has now increased to 10% if all of our standard procurement template documents. So that's a really good step forward as far as I'm concerned in terms of procurement. It was a really welcome step when we launched the Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership. And I think that's particularly important in many ways, because that's not just about what we're doing in the city, but it's about showing how we can take some of the stuff that we've been working on in the city for some time and actually lead across the whole county in terms of our work on making our economy more inclusive. And we know that that is a real challenge for us, both in Oxford and in Oxfordshire. We have an incredibly fast growing economy, but we need to make sure that everybody is benefiting from that. So as part of our work to actually address that specifically in Oxford, we have, for instance, been focusing on the redevelopment of Standingford House on Cave Street, and that is progressing, and that's also an important step. This year also saw the landmark of over 100 employers who are paying the Oxford Living Wage, which again is incredibly welcome. And we still have more who are joining us, so that is also welcome. I think in terms of affordable housing, the story sort of tells itself. 318 affordable homes completed in Oxford so far this year, with more still to come. And OX Place delivering its greenest homes yet. So that is also incredibly welcome, with 8 new bungalows that are nearly zero carbon. And having been around some of them, I can tell you they are pretty impressive. And again, that's bringing together 2 strands straight away, because you've obviously got zero carbon. These are also affordable homes. These are council homes, providing really important space for people to live in a zero carbon way, and also tackling the cost of living, because obviously it's about bringing down people's energy costs as well. Further on sort of the green agenda, we've also seen the delivery of the public sector decarbonisation scheme and the impact that has had on our leisure, which has been pretty massive, an 86.4% reduction in gas consumption and 56% reduction in carbon emissions across leisure, which again is extremely welcome. I think I will stop there because it's hard to pick out all of the different positive points, and I'm no doubt going to offend somebody by having missed their pet project, but feel free to draw everyone's attention to whatever your pet project is. I'm also not going to go into huge detail, or indeed any detail, about the future plans, because again, I think it's really frankly quite hard to pick on individual items. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to ask Mish if he wants to add anything, but then I think the simplest thing is for us to just take questions and comments. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Well, I'll actually first start with thanking you, Chair, for sending through some corrections over the weekend, gladly accepted. And if anyone else spots any that need to be incorporated, then please do send them to me. We will be doing, after we've completed the process through Scrutiny and Cabinet, a sort of final proofread, check through before the thing goes to print. So that's yet to do. I think perhaps the kind of the obvious point to make is, as the council leader has said, that this is now the 4th year of the business plan, iterating from the corporate strategy 2020 to 24. This year, this calendar year, I'll be working and kicking off the sort of the whole work stream to develop the next 4-year council strategy from 24 to 28, and we anticipate that we would then continue to deliver business plans much in the same way on the annual basis, reviewing what's been delivered in the prior year, as well as setting out the objectives for the forthcoming year.
Thank you both very much. Okay, so because this is obviously a very wide-ranging item, the way I'd like to do this is if I could have a show of hands of people who have questions, and I'll note some names now. Hands for anyone who'd like to ask a question. So I got Councillor Coyne, Councillor Pegg, Councillor Altaf Khan. Okay, great. So I'll write those down. And then what I'll do is, if we kick off with the first one, which by virtue of raising our hand first will be Councillor Coyne, and then if we stick to that topic with anyone else with related questions, and then move on to other people. So try to keep it keep a topic together, basically. So Councillor Coyne, please kick us off.
Hi, it's very full and very well done, I think. I just wanted to ask about the service integration phase 1, which is point K. So the integrated locality-based delivery model for community housing is supporting thriving communities and tackling inequalities and improving participation. But can you explain more how the restructuring is actually helping? Because from what I've understood, teams are increasingly overstretched and struggling, residents may be struggling to access support. I was given a 4 to 6 week wait time at one of the advice centres. I hope that's an appropriate question.
At an advice centre or at a locality?
Sorry, yes, that was.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Sorry, I hadn't realised that was the end of that one. Sorry.
Apologies for not going through you, Chair. I was just wanting to clarify.
Yeah. No, so you caught me on the hop there. Okay, in that case, Councillor Pegg, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were going in themes and I don't have anything on the same theme as that.
No,
do you want me to just? Yeah.
Sorry, I've tangled things up. Would anybody else like to ask anything on the on the same topic as you say? Yeah, okay. Yeah, because nobody was sort of leaping forwards. I thought we'd that's the next question. Please carry on.
Yeah, I had a few questions. So one was around the implementing the EDI strategy as mentioned. I just wondered if that's implementing it just in the council or if it's implementing it in ODS and Oxplace and the other companies as well. Then the other two, one was on 65, it mentions having retrofitting champions as one of the things that was going to be done. I was just wondered if that did go ahead, because I don't think it's mentioned in the comments and a quick Google didn't bring anything up either. And then on page 69, it talks about implementing a new waste strategy. And then there isn't a progress update for year 3. So I just wondered if you'd be able to give us a progress update on what has happened with doing that work.
Cool. So I see why I become confused now. Have you written down Councillor Coyne's question with intent to answer it later? Okay, fantastic. In that case, please do go ahead now. You're sort of, I took your very brief answer to be a sort of a, I'll take that up with you on email.
No, not at all. Sorry, I wasn't sure how you wanted to do this, but
yes, no,
if
please,
you wanted
please
to
go ahead
answer as we go along, which might be easiest for everybody, including me, because otherwise I'll be already forgetting questions.
Yes, please do. My intention was the normal ping pong, but just with the questions on the same topic to be in the same
I think I'm probably going to ask Mish to answer Councillor Pegg's questions because he's far more expert on the answers to those than I am. But I will give a first bash at Councillor Coyne's. So I mean, I think in terms of the integration, it's still very much a work in progress, and I wouldn't like to say that it's done yet. And I think you're right to identify the fact that there are some difficulties at the moment in terms of recruitment and retention and being able to have the fullest staffing possible. That's one of the reasons why the integration is quite important, I think, because it does actually improve our capacity to support people and support local communities. So I think the answer is it's very much a work in progress. I wouldn't say that the problems that you're currently experiencing, and I'm very sorry to hear those, and I am very happy to take those up separately if you'd like to give me specific examples. I wouldn't say they're the result of the integration. I'd say they're a result of the fact that generally speaking, I think like a lot of employers, we are struggling to have the exact right workforce at the moment, and this is part of the solution to tackling that.
So let me pick up other ones. The EDI strategy work, essentially the EDI strategy, yes, I mean, there are different programs for that, which is delivered with staff and that which is sort of being more broadly being delivered by the communities teams. I mean, to some extent, it actually links directly with the update Lee was just giving about more broad work on the integration program.
Yeah, sorry, I did mean to answer that bit of your question, Lucy. On the EDS, because I think you specifically said, does it cover the companies as well? And the answer to that is yes, it does, is my understanding. OX Place, though, has a fairly small workforce and it's pretty much almost all joint with the council. Obviously, ODS is a much larger workforce, but I mean, I think we would expect them to be working to the same strategy, and my understanding is it does cover ODS as well.
So picking up then retrofitting champions. Yes, so we have actually, we are directly right now in the process of recruiting retrofitting champions, and this is specifically in linked to the social housing decarb fund bid, which is live, and we should be sort of hearing, touch wood, any moment now from government about the award against that bid that we've made, and that's to retrofit 300 of our homes. And meetings have been held with 10 ambassadors in the first instance to recruit champions to promote that. I think that there's also in parallel, there's work which actually has been led by the Low Carbon Hub, which is on a kind of a more citywide basis. They held a retrofitting event last year, and that's sort of links to the community action groups and some of the champions that they're seeking to identify through that. And then I think it's perhaps also worth drawing attention to a third area that we're looking at, and this is specifically in relation to Rose Hill and the Clean Heat Streets programme that we have now been confirmed that there's funding for, which is to fit, I can't remember how many, 150, I'm thinking 150 heat pumps in homes in a very small geographic area. This is to do with testing the capacity of the network to below the substations. But we absolutely will need retrofitting champions to help promote that, because we need, essentially, they're looking to get to a density of about 1 in 4 homes being retrofitted in that space. So very much still on the agenda and live. The other one, I'm afraid that the answer is no, we haven't achieved that. So to update the recycling and waste strategy, the reason for that though is mainly because we've been waiting to get guidance from government about some very significant changes that they're making to the whole waste and recycling regime. This is be implementing essentially a sort of producer pays type model for packaging materials and so on. And in my discussions with colleagues at ODS, our view, and indeed actually on a county-wide basis through the Resources and Waste Partnership, it's quite difficult to really work out what our waste and recycling system is going to look like in say 5 years' time, since we don't yet know what the structure of these changes are. So I think that this is one which we just have to roll over for the next iteration.
Can I also just come back on that? I was recently at the District Council Network Conference as well, and it was a common complaint, I have to tell you, across all district councils, was that the lack of clarity from government was causing a lot of problems for councils who a number of whom are in the same position as us and other Oxfordshire councils, in wanting to sort of revisit their waste strategies and not really feeling able to do so at the moment because of the lack of clarity from government. I guess it's worse for those councils who are currently going out to contract. At least we have the advantage of having an in-house contract for waste, which allows us to be a lot more flexible in the way that we respond to government in these measures. But for those who are about to launch a new contract, it's pretty tricky at the moment.
Cool. Thank you both very much. I have one quick follow-up on waste and recycling, then I'll see if anybody, are you also coming in on this topic? Yeah, fantastic. One quick follow-up, which is in the business plan, you mentioned we were actually with lobbying central government concerning that waste and recycling change. Is that just lobbying for clarity, or is there a particular direction that of travel that we're looking to encourage there?
If you're going to ask me on the great detail of this, I might have to come back to you with a written response, but my understanding is that we aren't entirely happy with what we think is the general direction that government might be going in on this. And we do have some specific asks, but I would have to get back to you on the detail of that.
I'd appreciate that, thank you. Councillor Hunt, your question.
Thank you. I'm just going back to retrofitting actually, because I think what's really urgent is to be looking at all of the council stock so that we don't get to the point where we're still demolishing buildings, which is a huge part of actually reaching net zero. So in St Clement's, I didn't know the history of Standingford House, but actually it was a building with a huge amount of integrity. And I know from tenants in the building, particularly architects, they were very disappointed that the council had got to the point where they felt they had to demolish the building. I know there's housing and things, also being included in that space, but it seems to me we need to be very, very conscious now. And if you read, there's an article today in The Guardian about this, we really must be looking at all of our historic, as in anything built really before 1970 buildings, in order that nothing else is now demolished and that we can actually move forward and retrofit everything to this degree, which takes imagination, perhaps takes a bit more investment or working with different types of developers. But I just think in terms of wording, we really need to now focus on this so that it doesn't happen again. And I think this is something that we all need to come together on.
I think that is our approach. Our approach would be to always look, first of all, to retrofit, and it would be an absolute last resort to not take that approach. But I can't promise to never knock down a building ever again, because there will be reasons why you have to do that, or it is just totally financially unviable to do anything else. But I do absolutely say that it is our priority to try and retrofit wherever possible, and that we fully understand that is generally the far more sustainable option. So that's why it would be a priority.
Thank you. Is anybody else wishing to come in on this topic? Otherwise, I know I've got a question waiting from Altaf. Don't see any. I've got different topic. Okay, fine. I'll add you to the queue. I'm having to write down the queue because I've complicated the system enough. Councillor Altaf Khan, please, your question.
Question and comment, and it is, I would link these 2-3 things with this thriving community strategy, which did come to the scrutiny committee. And in that as well, and also looking at this council business plan, we always saying is the work is in progress. We are celebrating in progress, but is not much of progress to see actually in thriving communities. As I said, the community centers work or the activities pre-COVID and after COVID, if you see there is a huge difference, and there's not much. It says how we are tackling with that. It also says Oxford continuing celebrating diversity, but how we are differently celebrating. Is this just a celebration or engagement somehow? I don't see the links between those. It also says citizens will increase their active engagement in civic and political life and ongoing engagement work of election team to increase participation. Unfortunately, and I'm afraid, I did said in the full council, and people might took that as a political point, but it wasn't a political point. That when you have such a decision-making budget council, you have such a scrutiny committee, and public engagement is maybe nil or 1%, or the best answer we came up is oh no, there are 7 people watching on the YouTube. So, and I can assure you and tell you that if you want to come, any one of the cabinet officer to attend the Headington ward meeting, we always every month get 30 plus people attending. So we have 24 wards. And how come we can't engage people with the council work, and how we can say that there's a thriving strategy there, but is how practically working that? I don't see any activities in community centers. I don't see any sort of new initiative. I know always we talk about the budget and try to criticize the central government, but there is, I think, a duty or a something as a local representative or local authority to do. And my last point is about this vulnerable people continue to be safeguarded against harm. And I know it does say we have this slavery, anti-slavery coordinator, but I think the approach here is a very old and traditional. We don't have that sort of slavery. We have a very modern style of slavery, and last week I was told there are 300,000 to 400,000 new students allowed by this government. Again, you can criticize government, but they are only allowed 20 hours to work. And when you have paid 15,000 and you find accommodation and come here, obviously you'll be looking for the shadow economy work, whatever somebody pays, even peanuts, or they will try to do. So how do we, this is a multi-agency work. I understand the vulnerable people, a lot of work falls under the county and other agencies. So how do we tackle this modern type of the abuse, I would call, or you could call slavery? And how do we engage with other agencies? I have personal experience of a casework with a vulnerable person and reporting those to social services, police, and other places. I didn't go much far with that, and the person was clearly, in a way, robbed, a very vulnerable person. So I don't see from these headlines that we are continuing safeguarding people. There are people suffering. I don't see there are much of engagement or the community thriving happening, and the people, especially engagement with the local authority and their work, which is absolutely, I think, 48 councillors are here in the cabinet to represent the 150,000 population. Thank you.
So there's a lot there, yes. Do you want to sort of quickly, do you want to say the bullet points that you've got, and we'll see what's
I'll do my best. So yeah, I mean, because they're all quite sort of separate topics, really. First of all, on community centres, I mean, I have to say it's not my experience. So my local community centre has actually just reopened after several years closed. That would be Bullingdon Community Centre, and it's absolutely thriving. It's really, really busy. I actually also live next door to a community centre, and again, I mean, you can barely get a booking in it. It's completely packed. So I think that there are differences in different community centres around the city, and I think that is something that is being explored by the by officers, because there do seem to be some particular issues with a couple of community centres where there is clearly not the same level of activity, and I think there are obviously some questions as to why that is. And we need to help them to make sure that those community centres are open to people, because, you know, that's what they're there for. I mean, what I would also say on community centres is that we're incredibly unusual in our city, having so many directly owned and some directly managed, but mostly managed by community associations, community centres across our city. And this is, you know, it is not accidental. It is because we have made decisions over the years to invest in those community centres and to continue to invest in those community centres, as indeed we are. We've just rebuilt Bullingdon, and we are in the process of rebuilding East Oxford, and will be soon doing the same for Blackbird Leys. So, I mean, all of those things are really important. We think they're valuable to local communities, and we will continue to support them. I know you had a lengthy debate into the Thriving Community Strategy, which has got huge numbers of points in it, so I don't think it's particularly helpful to kind of go over that again. But all I would say is that, I do think there is quite a lot that is going on in there. And I think that it is worth having another look at that and seeing all the very many different things that we are doing across the city to encourage our communities to be thriving and active. In terms of active engagement, for the record, I wasn't one of the 7 people watching the budget. So there were actually 7 unique people watching the budget, and none of them was me. I would, however, not really judge the engagement of council by the number of people who watch a budget meeting, or indeed, I'm sorry, Barry, who come to watch Scrutiny either. I mean, there are some very dedicated people who do come along to our council meetings, but to me, that's not what engagement is about. I mean, we're all slightly odd people who take a really big interest in the sort of, the kind of ways in which policy is made. But I think for most people, they're just interested in what happens in their area. So it is not in the slightest bit surprising to me that you have more people who come to a meeting that's held in Headington, because that's what people care about. And so we have to find ways of engaging people in the issues around their area. And I do think there is more that we can do around that, but we are working on it. And actually, again, going back to Barbara's question earlier, I think some of the locality work that we're doing will help with that, because it is about sort of taking those services to a more local place. We have reinvigorated our council panel, which allows us, or in the process still of doing that, we're still recruiting to it. And that means that we have a representative group of the population that we can go to and ask questions, but it also means that that's a group of people from whom we can take different groups, whether that's geographical, age, whatever it might be, to look at particular issues as well. But there's always more that we can do around this, and it's really important that we do, because I think it is very important that we continue to engage with local people in our city and to hear their views. One of the other things, of course, that we're doing is to send out newsletters increasingly directly to people across the city, and I know that that's a pretty popular service. And lots of people are signing up to it to hear it directly from us. So that's another good way of engaging with people. On the issue of modern slavery, that is an exceptionally important issue. I've sadly dealt with cases of modern slavery in my own ward, and it's really serious. It's very difficult to deal with, and of course it does absolutely, as you quite rightly said, involve a multi-agency approach. I mean, ultimately, the organisation with the powers to deal with it most are the police. And we obviously work very closely with them under those sort of circumstances. But I think that the multi-agency approach set up and embodied in MASH, as it's called, multi-agency safeguarding hub, is a really important one and has really helped in terms of sharing data, which is really important. And that was one of the reasons for setting it up, was because it was quite difficult for organisations prior to that to share data in a way that was allowed. And so the hub allows that to happen. But these are not easy issues to tackle, and they will not be solved by us alone. There are really big international networks, unfortunately, and this is really serious international crime in quite a lot of cases that are involved in some of these networks and the modern slavery. So it would be naive to think that we're going to solve it on our own in Oxford, but we can do our part, and I think that we are doing our part in terms of the work that we put into tackling that particularly heinous crime, and also in safeguarding adults and children.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arshad, you waved a hand. You had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. Obviously, my question was also with regards to thriving communities. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and I think that we've progressed, given that we've just come out of COVID, sort of 2 to 3 years after. I think the questions when I'm working on the ground is what I'm finding is I work closely with Sophia and obviously the East locality and on the ground. So my output to the officer involved would be really to say that the food is coming less and less from behind, and if there's any strategy that we can help provide more food, because people are using those food banks. And also I was feeling I work with a lot of international women's groups, and what I'm finding is not just the fact that there is not enough events as such, it's more about breaking those barriers and giving them a sense of hope and giving them a sense of belonging for people who have newly arrived here. So I think it's really more about easing up the communication flows, obviously, well, not everyone would have known, but there was an international event for champion women in Blackpool East today. And I just feel like we can really be amplifying more of that, especially given that the International Women's Day is coming up, and breaking those structural barriers. And the way we would do that is improve the communication. And I think when we can tie up with community centres as well, Asylum Welcome and all the other agencies, partnering agencies that have been written and we speak of, where we give government grant funding, not just from ward member budgets, but from also council every year. When we're allocating them, I think it's important to try and break the communication down, either via email to let them know, like, we've got an event coming, so more people are engaged. And it's awfully difficult. It's quite right, we've got children, people in different situations, might be sick, or physical disability. So we need to be really looking at why it is that people are not coming out. Is it the motivation? Now, I think that also thriving communities, I'm not sure if it is part of thriving communities, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your move was fantastic. Now, there are a few issues that I found with that was as well, there needs to be more women-only spaces. I know you do a lot of work with the youth, obviously engaging with them. Your move was very good because you sent out letters to the elderly at home, and that let them know of the service, but also as a follow-up after 3 months. I think some people need that motivation to go back to it again. And although there's like these Goji groups of becoming more health conscious and using that, some people really genuinely struggle to work with new technology. Not everybody's got a grandchild, someone who can get them online, or somebody who can help them. So I think that your move, and there was another part of your move, was with the children. My question and recommendation really is to really improve communication with all the different agencies that we're working with and support groups. And I think that's why that might be a way that we can try and simplify and engage with them more actively, and then alert it more, not just on our social media groups, but through all these different groups. And as councillors, we work hard all year round on engaging with the local communities, but I think that the gap would be really from the top, to hold more women's spaces. For example, not everybody wants to do Zumba with men or have a male leading the class, So, and you've got to understand why that is and why it's important to have safe spaces for women as well. Just women only sometimes be nice.
I'm tempted to say I agree, as in I think Councillor Arshad's made a lot of extremely valid points, and it is correct that it is a challenging environment at the moment for many people, and we obviously do need to continue to look to see how we can help support in terms of food in particular. And I know that there is a food strategy that is being worked on currently across Oxfordshire, and you can potentially ask the next speaker on that one. But I think that it's important that we do get the communications right, and there's always more that we can do in terms of communications. And I would urge people, if they are aware of groups that are not being contacted currently, or they feel are not getting information, to let council officers know, because they won't know unless we tell them about different groups that are out there. And I mean, I constantly come across new groups in Oxford because they're forming all the time, and they won't necessarily know that they should be letting the council know of their existence. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we do sort of share information as much as possible ourselves, but also make sure that the council are actually aware of contacts for different groups, and that's always helpful, frankly.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier making a recommendation. Richard has kindly pointed out the couple of existing items on a similar theme of supporting thriving communities and specifically engagement of items 6 and 7 here. I could pass this down to you if you want to take a look, see if there's anything that you'd want to change or add to what's there, and then we can revisit that at the end of the discussion and see what we'd want to put forward as a recommendation. I also have a scribbled note noting that apparently 87 people have watched the budget since the budget council took place. So heading for triple figures. Well, YouTube fame is not far off for any of us. Councillor Mundy, you had well, sorry, unless anyone else is wanting to come in on this topic. I didn't see any waving hands. In which case, Councillor Mundy, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm on thriving communities as well on the table of priorities. Now it's 58, page 58 of the report, and it mentions the Wolvercote Millstream, the part of the River Thames that has bathing water status. It doesn't say Wolvercote Millstream, just to not confuse you, but it says working with local communities to make wild swimming safer. I just wondered whether we thought it would be appropriate in a table such as that to reference Thames Water. Obviously, council unanimously passed a motion at the end of January, which really levelled quite a lot of criticism at Thames Water, and obviously their responsibility for the environment and for the water quality of our river. And it may be worth including something like that, is my suggestion. I don't know whether that's appropriate for that kind of a presentation or not, but yeah, something on that, along those kind of lines, as to their responsibility for the bathing water status, the quality of the water. Yeah, thank you.
Mish wants to go first.
So yeah, we have dialogue with Thames Water, and indeed a meeting is now confirmed. It's in the diary, and I believe, if invitations haven't already gone out to members to join that meeting, there is going to be first of all a meeting with the leader and portfolio holder in respect of bathing water, and then an open meeting for members. And I mean, there are many issues actually that we are dealing with Thames Water, which go beyond the bathing water. So they're to do with, as I'm sure many members are well aware, sewage flooding in gardens and all this sort of thing. So and then of course the Ring Road water main closure last year. So that'll be an ongoing dialogue. But in terms of framing things for this business plan document, the way I've tried to structure it is as far as possible to sort of provide, if you like, guidance to fellow officers on stuff that they need to do. So rather than to provide guidance to Thames Water or others, if you wish. I mean, I'm sure we can characterise something around the sort of continuing to work with Thames Water and others to try and achieve these objectives.
I mean, I think I agree with Mish that this is about our actions. I think we could include some wording which references Thames Water, though, because this is not possible to do without Thames Water, I think would be my slight sort of pushback to Mish on that one. I agree with you, Edward. I think it needs to be mentioned there. However, what I would also add in agreement with Mish is that this document isn't supposed to be about describing everything that we do as a council. This is about focusing in on our priorities. So just because we're doing something doesn't mean it will necessarily feature in here. And just to reassure, as Mish has said, we have managed to secure not one, but hopefully 2 meetings with Thames Water, one a sort of portfolio holder meeting with them to sort of try and bottom out some of these issues, and the second a sort of proper Q&A for all councillors to put their burning questions to Thames Water, and I'm sure it will be an interesting session.
Thank you both. Okay, yeah, I think recommendation-wise, that sounds quite sensible to me. Of recommending, noting that, because we do there's plenty of other stuff where we talk about partnering or influencing or yada yada yada. So explicitly noting that angle would seem like a wise thing to me, especially because that'll cause us to report back about what happened this time next year, which would be a good thing to see. Is that clear enough? Fantastic. Excellent. Anybody wanting to come in on this topic? And if not, anybody wanting to come in with a new topic? Councillor Coyne?
I just wondered if, with regard to, again, equality's impact, whether there was any way you could elaborate on how the anti-racism charter gets embedded. Again, that might be detail that's not going to appear, but I had a question about that, and also the anti-racism quality mark. I wondered what the steps are to take that up.
I think we're both thinking we're not sufficiently expert on this. I mean, I do know that the anti-racism charter has I think there's been pretty good engagement on it, is my understanding this time round. So I think, from that perspective, that is good. But I think on your more detailed question, I'd have to ask an officer to get back to you on that.
Thank you. Considering it's an answer to scrutiny, if you wouldn't mind copying the committee the response, that would be also be fantastic. Councillor Khan.
Yeah, just I'm not sure it is a recommendation, but certainly I would make this point that when you're reading these strategy or plans, and when the word keep coming is progress or ongoing, it really doesn't give you any sense of what's the target and what's the milestone and where we are. So the way these strategy or these wordings are written down, to be honest, looks like you are in an ocean and you don't know how deeper and how longer is this, and when we will get somewhere, or whether we will get somewhere or not. So I think we need some more clarity, like what are the targets and what are the milestones and where we are, and measuring the progress or ongoing work. How do we measure that? It's just a sentence saying ongoing work or in progress. So which is a very vague, and to me, it gives that, yeah, you give up hope. I don't think we keep hearing for years and years, the work is in progress or ongoing. So when it will completed, where it will go, how do we see the results of it?
I mean, I think it depends a lot on the priority, because some of them have very clear targets which are being met, and some of them will be ongoing and potentially forever, because, I think that the idea that we will, in the next 4 years even, so in the next iteration of our business plan, for instance, solve Oxford's housing problems, or make Oxford a totally equal society, or gets to zero carbon by 2028. None of these things are going to happen. So yes, we will be continuing to make progress towards some of these things. We won't have achieved the ultimate aims of all of those, which would be to reach zero carbon, to solve Oxford's housing problems, and to have a truly equal society in Oxford, where people felt properly included in our economy. Those things are not going to be solved overnight. So I think it is absolutely right and proper that we continue to try and make progress on all of these issues. There are, as I said, milestones, I think, that are quite clear on a number of those different things, and we have talked about a number of them today. And we have, for instance, during the course of this business plan, I referred to it earlier, built one of the community centres that I was talking about, and we're in the process of building 2 more, or rebuilding 2 more. So I think those are all quite sort of tangible and easy to see targets. There are others which are less tangible, but there are milestones that you can see. And actually our EDI strategy, I think, has got a number of others. I think there's been quite a lot of progress in terms of the employment statistics across our organisation. But that will, again, be a slow progress, because, ongoing recruitment will allow us to improve the way that our workforce can be more diverse, but that will take time, because we're not starting from a position of perfection in terms of total diversity.
Yeah, just to add a couple of points on that. I think that with the business plan, evidently some things are effectively iterative, and other things are very discrete. When we're looking at the next 4-year strategy, we'll do some more work trying to identify some high-level metrics which would help in terms of giving some overall sense of whether or not we're closer at the end of the next 4-year programme to having achieved a more enabled, a more inclusive economy, etc. It's not easy, and some of those very high level metrics are almost inevitably bound to be impacted on by lots of things that the council has no control over at all. Like, well, giving that example, the macro economy, we obviously have no control over, but we can nonetheless, we can show by delivering some individual things, or iteratively describing some bits of progress, as well as some tracking KPIs, hopefully help with that greater clarity that you're looking for.
And just to use that example again, I mean, one of the things that I already referred to, again, I mean, we've reached over 100 employers who pay the Oxford Living Wage. Well, that is because of work that we have done as a council to push the Oxford Living Wage and promote it. And that's, I mean, I think I'm right in saying we only had about 50, or maybe fewer than 50, just 4 years ago. So, that's 15. Okay, well, there you go. So that's a really big improvement that we've made, and actually it continues to grow all the time. And then in addition to that, things like Cave Street and other areas in the city where we are promoting inclusive workspaces and trying to make sure that there are employment sites that are open to everybody again. I mean, these are quite concrete examples of things that we are progressing, and I think are quite tangible and easy to see.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt, I believe you had a hand up. Okay. Is anybody else wanting to come in? If not, then as always, if you don't have questions, you get my questions. I'll go at them. Let's go briefest first. Why not? Because then if the big one's really boring, then we can just sort of fade out. So first of all, the little one. Priority 4, Action 8, is about greening and tree planting and so on, and it talks about sort of commissioning a biodiversity net gain strategy, which is good to see. Surprised not to see anything there on implementing the urban forest strategy or taking whatever next steps appropriate on the urban forest strategy that was already commissioned. Is there any particular reason why that isn't mentioned, or ought we to make some mention as to what are the next steps with that? Priority number 4, action deliverable number 8.
I think it's page 37.
So the delivery of the urban forest strategy is very, very complex. And so we made some progress in the last year with some tree planting on streets and some other trees on some of the land that we own as council. I think approximately 130 to 120 odd trees were planted. Essentially what our focus on for the urban forest strategy going forwards in terms of scale is to get more people who own land privately to plant on their land, because the council's space in terms of our own land is limited for tree planting. Street trees, we would love to plant many, many more street trees, no question. The funding, however, for street trees, the council just doesn't have. And so we're in a sense, we're in a push and pull situation with the county council around how this is done, since the highways are clearly theirs. And they actually, many of the levers around how you get to permissions and so forth for tree planting on streets sits with them. But we will continue to chip away at that, I think is probably what I would say. I think last sort of point linked to that is that as we develop a proper model for biodiversity net gain, where we essentially we take money from developers towards increasing net biodiversity, which can't be delivered on site, then that might help with things like some of these additional tree planting initiatives that might provide some funding towards that.
So in that case, for all that there are difficulties, as you mentioned, and funding is definitely one of them. I've managed to get two trees in the street. It was very difficult to get done. But nonetheless, you say there are some next steps in mind. So in that case, if the committee is content, I'd recommend that that ought to be noted as to what that ongoing action is. So keep the strategy alive in the document. People content that should be done. I see nods around the table. It's good. All right, fantastic. Moving on, what did I have next? I have the Botley Road Labs, which are mentioned in priority 1, target 4. Priority 2, target 4. This is around the Botley Road, the large shed, sort of big box stores. And currently the deliverable there is to facilitate their replacement by higher density commercial. Previously at this committee, we discussed the TAM regarding how that redevelopment might happen. And at that meeting, we discussed whether OFAS would facilitate housing on such sites in the future, as and when OFAS is able to get delivered. And that obviously leads to improvement of flood zones and things of that form. I think the conclusion at that meeting was that definitely can't do it now because currently the flood zones are prohibitive, but that OFAS may indeed deliver the goods. And that if and when that it did, then the council would be positive to the big sheds becoming appropriate density housing. Is that something which we should also follow up here?
Well, I don't think there's anything that we could do as a council in the next year that would be possible to put in here. And I mean, there's nothing we could put in the local plan that isn't already in the local plan that would do that. So already in the local plan, any employment site could have housing put on it, except it can't in this particular instance because the Environment Agency would object. So the factor that needs to change is the Environment Agency changing its view on that piece of land. We have no influence over that, and we certainly have no influence over it in the next year, because the next year is not going to see the delivery of OFAS. So at least I don't think it's going to be delivered in the next year. I'd be quite surprised. So I think that the key issue here is two key issues, I guess. One would be the Environment Agency changing their view over that piece of land and whether they think it would be suitable for housing. And the second, frankly, would be a massive change in value, because even if the Environment Agency did say, yes, it's completely fine, you can build housing there, I can't see any landowner there wanting to do that, because the value of that land for employment is far, far greater than it is for housing.
Okay, I definitely take the point about not being able to write something down in a 1-year timescale. So I'll drop that one and set a Google Calendar reminder to give you a hard time about that in approximately 2027. That's all right. I'm flattering myself with my prospects of re-election there, obviously. Might come back to haunt me. Okay, what else did I have? I will move on to the bigger ticket one, which is priority 1, target 4, about business growth. This one surprised me a little bit, just in the sense of, so I'll try and phrase this quite carefully, growth as an end, as opposed to growth as a means to an end. So I explicitly don't want to sort of give a degrowth or an anti-growth sort of message here. What I mean is more growth as a means to achieve full employment, for example, or growth as a means to achieve maximum yield for the council in the context of the Oxford model. So I'm surprised to see that there as a goal, as opposed to as something which might be a way to deliver something else that we want, like employment, like fuel for the Oxford model. I wondered if you had any thoughts on why that should be a goal in itself and be a target that we're pursuing.
Well, I mean, the only reference I can see is we will have secured different types of new workspace in the city to support business and employment growth. Is that what you're objecting to?
It is. So there's the one about different types of workspace, but then there's also the, I suppose they're sort of embedded into one goal, really, aren't they? So there's number 3 is very explicit about wishing to do different types, right? Number 3 is about diversity of employment, sectoral and size. Whereas 4 I took to be more focused on quantity in wanting there just more. I
think it's an interpretation of emphasis here. I think we could be dancing on a bit of a pinhead, but I think what it's saying is there is business and employment growth in the city, and we need to secure different types of workspace in order to support it. That's how I read it, and that's what I think is intended here.
I see. So you read it as not, the goal is that there should be business and employment growth. The goal is that, supposing that it happens, then you will accommodate it.
It's not supposing it happens, it is happening. We are the 4th fastest growing city in the country in terms of our economy. So it is happening, and it is important that we make sure that we are keeping pace with it in terms of providing suitable space, both for employment and for housing.
Fair enough. Okay. Then the only other one that I had is that housing goal number 5 is still reads as if it is pretty substantially orchestrated around Oxfordshire 2050, in that it's about the agreed county-wide approach to et cetera, is that just out of date? Is that getting at the sort of the revised approach with using the HENA and Oxford 2040 as an angle to achieve that by the means?
Well, obviously the wording in the strategy is the wording in the strategy when it was created in prior to 2020. So that does kind of predate the unfortunate collapsing of the 2050 plan by neighbouring authorities. We will not dwell too long on that, but I mean, obviously the duty to cooperate does still exist, and I think that's what the more relevant action for year 4 kind of refers to, and obviously we will continue to work with neighbouring authorities because we will need to do so and they will need to do so.
All right, thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything else? Otherwise, we should probably move on to our next item. We got, I know, Councillor Arshad's recommendation. What would you like to do that?
Having revisited the grid, it's actually already got it in there. Contacting other agencies, so I think it's already there.
Okay, in that case, I've got 2 recommendations in front of me, one of which is Councillor Mundy's relating to Thames Water, one of which is mine relating to the urban forest strategy. And unless anybody else has anything else, then I suggest Councillor Hunt.
I mean, the only wording I can find in terms of reviewing stock, looking at council-owned buildings refers to housing. It just does seem to me that, or you know, have I missed something? That actually the language, you know, why did Standing Field House? Why was it allowed to fall into disrepair? I think, you know, that is a mistake, and to learn from that mistake and not let it happen again is very important. And how can we get some wording in there just about looking at all of our buildings, not just the housing, so that this unfortunately doesn't happen again.
Well, it may not be in here, but it is a piece of work that we are doing. It is ongoing. So there is a massive sort of stock survey going on. In fact, it is in there, right? Okay. So where are you going to show me?
It is.
Right. We go. So where are we? Which one? This is so publish the asset management action plan and review progress over the first year to identify new income streams from the council's assets, support the council's broader ambitions, including workspace. So that is about other buildings. The asset management action plan is part of is looking at the state of all of our buildings. So that is an ongoing piece of work. And you're right. I think it was long overdue. So that is something that we're putting right. And there is another item in there which says introduce a new asset management system to create and deliver a proactive longer term repairs and maintenance programme, which I think is even more relevant to your points. So hopefully that reassures you.
All right then, thank you all very much. I suggest we should move on to the next item. So thank you very much, Councillor Brown. We retain Mish for the next item, and we are joined by Councillor Upton. And we also have Danny Granito. Pardon me? Okay. We have Danny Granito on the agenda, but not in person. Fantastic. Okay, thank you both very much. Councillor Upton, would you like to kick us off on the integrated care strategy?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I think it is now generally recognised that about 20% of your health and well-being is determined by the NHS, and the remaining 80% is everything else in your life. You know, things like, am I surrounded by junk food outlets? Can I easily get to my nearest park? Do I live in a damp house? Is there, am I stressed at work? These kinds of things. So given that, I think that the newly formed integrated care partnership, which brings together the NHS, GPs, local authorities, voluntary groups, etc. I think that is where health should sit. All of those things together, and this integrated care partnership is charged with creating a strategy to ensure that everybody has a good start in life, everybody lives well, everybody hopefully ages well, and that they can get the support they need when it is needed. You'll see in the document that there are kind of 5 principles set out. For me, the 2 key ones actually I think are prevention of ill health. We want to keep people healthier for longer. There's no point living to 100 if you're in really bad health for the last 30 years. And secondly, the tackling health inequalities. That is a really strong focus in it, and that is something that, of course, is very dear to us at Oxford City Council. So under those principles and things, you'll read that they've set out 18 priorities, all sorts of things around reducing smoking, better mental health for children, all sorts of things, some of which involve the City Council very directly, and some of them which don't involve us at all. One thing I think is very good about the strategy is the fact that they produced an easy read version as well, because it's quite a long document. And if you actually want people to engage with this, who's got the time to read the 60-page document? So the production of this easy read document, I'm sure has increased the numbers of people that have engaged with it. As a City Council, we have engaged very actively with it. We gave a lot of focus time from the aforementioned Danny Bonito, who's has been our very, very valuable officer who's been giving time to this. And she and I both attended the Integrated Care Strategy workshop in January. There's been our chief executive has been involved in a different level of different meetings. Dan Levison is the Oxfordshire sort of based director, and I do get to see him quite often at various things, so I'm able to feed in that way. So Danny and I had a meeting with various other cabinet members whose portfolios also touch on the many things that sort of might come under this strategy, and we produced Danny produced a written feedback to go to the ICP. And I think that, and they've produced a summary document of all the feedback they got, which I think reflects the things that we put in, but we'll wait to see whether they actually turn up in the strategy itself. So I think I shall leave it there and see if anyone has got questions. Oh, first of all, the mixture's got something. Just
to add, I mean, making the obvious point that this is a document that was produced by the Integrated Care Board and through the partnership, so it is their document rather than City Council's document. We have, as Councillor Upton has explained, we have been engaging probably more than most of the other district councils in the work, and it has been telling the level of interest that the NHS is in turn paying to us in the course of the past couple of months or so. We've had both the Chief Executive of the whole NHS come here and visit what's going on at our Rose Hill Community Centre and the linkage with health and community activities there, and we've had the Chief Medical Officer visiting Barton with a similar set of sort of criteria and objectives. So we are getting people's attention in terms of the work that's going on in this space.
Thank you both very much. Does anybody have any questions about the strategy? Yes, please.
Oh, sorry, where's my, oh, there we go. Yeah, one of mine was actually about the fact that it's now the ICS, and actually you partly answered my question by saying you've had regular contact with the head of the Oxford or Oxfordshire contingent, but I wondered how it's been working, given that there are so many authorities and local authorities now involved in the ICS, because it covers Buckinghamshire, West Berks and Oxfordshire, and I wondered how that had been and whether there'd been, I don't know if you can comment on a change, but whether there's been how that's been in terms of building a strategy that works for all of those authorities. And then I just had some questions, sort of they're more, for a bit more detail about the priorities around alcoholism and vaping. The one on alcoholism is whether there's work that we're doing as a council and sort of addiction support services, or whether I'm I think there's an overlap there. I might be wrong on that. And also just whether there's been a consideration of adding vaping into the section on smoking, because I think that to me is a big and I think there is a bit of a encouragement to get people who have already started smoking. They think that vaping is more healthy than smoking, so to get them to start smoking. But I mean, from my perspective, I think that the really worrying thing is that vaping is such a huge thing among young people, and that it's not a case of people who were, I mean, I'm of the age where I do have friends who were addicted to smoking and now vape, but there are lots of younger kids and actually kids who are going straight onto vaping, and I wondered if that's playing in to the strategy as well. So sorry, quite a few questions there.
I'll have a crack to start with and then hand to Mish for any additions. So I think it's a bit early to say whether how well it's going to work for all of the different counties together. I think it is good that each of the 3 counties has its own place director. So the fact that Oxfordshire has one, because solutions will be a bit different for each county, for each place. But I think that they are all talking to each other, and where things work, economies of scale or rolling out best practice, something that's working well in Berkshire, we can look at, can we do it here? I think that is hopefully going to work well. On alcoholism and vaping things, we actually had a big discussion about vaping at the Health Improvement Board a few months ago, because there are definite pros and cons. So as part of a strategy to give up smoking, if you are an existing smoker, it can be a useful part of that. But it absolutely, as you point out, it's also potentially a gateway into smoking for people who aren't. And we heard some evidence about children being able to buy these, especially as they're really marketed at children. They're fruit flavors and things like that. It's very worrying. So smoking cessation is one of the 3 main priorities of the Health Improvement Board. So it will definitely be being fed into the ICS strategy, because that is one of the biggest avoidable killers that is still prevalent. If we could wipe out smoking in one go, that would be probably the biggest thing we could do to improve the health of the nation.
And just picking up on the alcohol and alcoholism, so obviously it is one of the things that is sort of specifically drawn out in the strategy about reducing the proportion of people drinking alcohol to levels that are harmful to health and well-being. I guess the City Council, beyond the sort of the general active lifestyles and move together, and the programs actually we were just talking about a bit earlier, beyond that sort of intervention, there are obviously there's work continues with rough sleepers, where this is particularly acute, and so the kind of the wraparound approach now to support for rough sleepers very much builds substance abuse work into the whole referral process.
Thank you both. So as far as recommendations are concerned here, then presumably we'd be talking about things that we would recommend that the council takes back in its part in the partnership. Would you want to take something forwards about vaping?
Yeah, I think just a mention of it, because I think I'm also worried, I guess, as well as the fact that it can be a gateway. I think there is already emerging evidence that if you don't already vape, as well as being a potential gateway to smoking, vaping in and of itself is probably quite, not good for you. And I think I'm even worried about the fact that I just think the idea that kids are doing it is terrifying, basically. So I think it's, as well as being a gateway, I would say that I would be worried about it as a health concern in and of its own right. But I'm obviously not a science expert, so I would just like to kind of, I guess, put that forward as something to maybe be considered if it's not relevant for this document, just generally. But that was just my reading of the smoking section, because it didn't seem to mention it at all. But that's
okay. So if the committee is content, if the committee is content, I'd recommend that we should do something of the form. Recommend that the council continues to raise the issue of vaping and its relevance as the rate of smoking dwindles, but the rate of vaping increases. Sorry, Louise.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, thank you very much. I mean, if we can get it explicitly into the ICS strategy, then we'll try and do that. But yeah, I guess rest assured, even if it isn't in there, that it's definitely on the Health Improvement Board's radar.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I saw Councillor Jarvis with a question. So.
Yeah, I've got a few, some of which are quite overarching and some of them are quite specific. I guess to follow up on Lizzie's initial question, I had a question really around governance and the ICP. So in the initial paper, it refers to there being one chief executive and one council leader having a seat on the ICP, and obviously you've talked quite a lot there about the kind of slightly more informal mechanisms of influencing, but I guess the question really was around whether, given the very different natures of the district councils in our county and the very different, therefore, health needs and inequalities and all the factors that lead to the differential health outcomes, whether I guess to build on what Lizzie asked, like whether you feel that at the moment that mechanism of governance is effective in terms of having one representative of a chief executive and one from a council leader, and whether that situation can effectively represent the needs of the various different areas. And then another kind of general kind of comment or question really is around, throughout the strategy, I guess there's it sort of pains itself to talk through a lot of the underlying inequalities in health and how different demographics are affected differently in different areas. What I think is missing in some places is clearly in the kind of in the priority areas. Sometimes they relate to those different demographics and sometimes they don't. So for example, in some areas it talks about, a particular health issue affecting a particular community, and then goes on to say, and we're taking this as an action in a priority area to address that as part of the strategy. And then in other areas, that doesn't bleed through as well. So for example, on smoking cessation, there's a comment about LGBT people being more likely to smoke, and then there's no bespoke strategic area around that. And that's something I noticed in the strategy that I think throughout, it could be clearer in terms of how the preamble, which sets the health context and the sociological, socioeconomic context, could bleed through into the priority areas. And I think, yeah, I'm not going to go through where that is because it's sort of throughout in various places. And then my really specific question is on the section around inoculation and vaccination. I was surprised really that there wasn't something explicit as an area of focus around vaccine hesitancy and misinformation post-COVID, because if there's one thing that I think has clearly changed in the last 2 or 3 years around vaccination, is that the misinformation around vaccination has massively ramped up in the context of COVID, on top of what we know in a similar way that it did 25 years ago around the MMR vaccine. It feels like we're going through another wave of that, and it feels to me that ought to be a really key strategic priority in terms of the actions being taken on vaccination. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now. Yep.
Cute. Okay, again, I'll start the double act. So the governance. So yes, it's only one chief exec and one leader of the council going on to the main board, but those two do sit on the Oxfordshire Health and Wellbeing Board, which will have either the leader of the council or the relevant cabinet member, in this case me, on it. So they will come to that first, and I guess that's where we will all get to talk about things at the Health and Wellbeing Board, Oxfordshire Health and Wellbeing Board. Yeah, I guess in an ideal world, it would be nice to have all of us on the whole ICB, but I guess it would become unwieldy. And that position, that chief exec plus leader of the council, is going to rotate. Again, I mean, there are 5 of us, 5 districts, so it is going to be a long time before it gets round to us. But I've been chair of the Health Improvement Board for the last 2 years, so we've had sort of city dominance on that. But then that does mean, we won't get that back for another 4 years or so. But the governance, and do you want to add anything about governance?
Just that I mean, frankly, recognising the fact that we're reliant on, as things currently stand, actually South Oxfordshire District Council taking the representation forward. So we have created mechanisms to ensure that we as officers can share information and our positions as well. So it is actually now a regular topic that's being brought up right up to chief execs level in the sort of county-wide meetings, just frankly in recognition of the point that you made.
And just quickly, if I may, just in terms of the relationship between the Health and Wellbeing Board and the ICB, is that a formal relationship, or is it more in terms of trying to contextualize how the governance mechanisms work in practice? Is it organic and it's just occurring informally that happens, or is it formalized in any way?
I think that at the moment it is just organic. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So then coming on to your other points about making that sort of inequalities principle bleed through into all of the priorities. That's a really valid point. So this document, the strategy, it's gone out to all districts already. So I'm not sure if that point has been picked up specifically in the feedback that they have had, but if it's not too late, we're going to try and add that in to make sure that comes into the final document. Similarly for the vaccine hesitancy, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I mean, this is something that, we've got these community champions now in Oxford who have been, especially one of their main targets has been to try and overcome that. So again, see if we can get that specifically added, because that's a really good point. Thank you, Chris.
Sorry, just to build then, in terms, I mean, this obviously is the strategy document. There is going to be more detailed action planning that will follow. So I think one would expect to look for that sort of golden thread that takes you through to some more specific actions addressing some of the issues that you've identified. Also, actually, on vaccines, I mean, they have actually specifically set out that they want to look at the issue of, for example, the decline in uptake in childhood vaccines, which is prevalent here as well as elsewhere in the UK. And so there are going to, there is a programme which is there to try and address that.
Yeah. I guess for me, when reading through that, it all obviously seems clear and sensible and good. I think it read like it was written before the wave of misinformation around the COVID vaccination programme, where that is, I think, a specific thing that has changed in recent years in terms of public attitudes towards vaccinations. And I guess that was in terms of, if we're thinking about the broad, in terms of health in a broad context, in terms of communications, in terms of information, in terms of improving health literacy and all that, specifically tackling and combating that issue in the wake of COVID-19, I think is probably the kind of explicit thing that I think was missing. Yeah.
I think that's a fair comment. The only point I'd make, and to hopefully build confidence, is that this document was absolutely written in the light of COVID. I mean, this was produced in the last couple of months or so, and whenever I talk to any of the public health professionals in Oxfordshire, the issue about vaccine take-up, vaccine hesitancy is right up there. They're really aware of it. They're really on it. We have been, as members may be aware, we have had funded programmes here, specifically in Oxford, directed at trying to sort of build support in this space. And council obviously over the last few years done quite a bit of good work on that. So I don't think that it'll be lost as part of the action planning for taking this strategy forward.
Thank you, Beth. That sounded kind of like we could either roll into the previous recommendation or make something similar around vaccine hesitancy / disinformation, like particularly that role of disinformation that obviously has snowballed rather in the post-COVID environment, if people are content with that. I see nods and I see silence. I'm sure that's fine. Let's see. Well, I've seen a wave from Councillor Hunt. I'll come to Councillor. Yes, and yes. Sorry, I forgot. I'll come to Councillor Hunt first, please.
Thanks. I was just going to say the flip side to that is actually we have a hugely reduced vaccination programme here in the UK. I mean, it's problematic. And actually what we do need is some wording around the fact that we need to boost our vaccination programme. We need, well, you know, I mean, this government's not going to do it. But when you talk to Independent Sage, when you talk to Europeans, when you talk, I mean, friends in the US, they've had 5 jabs now. They're going to have a 6th in the autumn. You know, as we know, if you're under 50, you've only had 3 vaccines. It's a massive problem. So I really do think that we need to actually highlight the fact that we're not being given the vaccinations that we need in the UK right now. I'm talking about COVID.
I wonder if that's something I can separately take up with the Director of Public Health. Okay, so I'm trying to think what's the best place to raise that more quickly. With Director of Public Health directly, it'd be worth taking it to him. But I mean, I presume they base this on science. You would hope on scientific on advice. But point taken.
Can I take Councillor Arshad's question?
Is it possible if I can go next?
Yes. Oh, I see. Yes, certainly. Councillor Mundy's question then, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I just want to ask a few questions. So obviously the report does have, you know, some good aims, as has been pointed out already, you know, in terms of health inequalities and so on. I mean, I don't recall seeing anywhere about a budget that the ICB has. I mean, presumably these kind of things cost money. So I just want to get an understanding of, you know, what the resourcing is to the ICB and how they're resourcing the strategy. I have heard reports of cuts in staff. If you could maybe answer queries about that. That's someone else who's told me, but they've read that in the health journal. Sorry, health service journal. Sorry about that. Also, there is a set direction for the ICB that's pointed out in the report. I'd just like to understand what that means. You know, what the direction is. Is that, you know, something quite specific? That's and then also, so like I didn't see anything in there about sort of outsourcing or private health companies. I mean, is that a good sign that that's not in there at all, or is that just not being included for any particular sort of reason? And also just like as well, an understanding of Dan Levison's background. Obviously, as you've said, he's the director. It would just be good to know, you know, what his background is and who he's responsible to as well. Thanks.
Tricky questions, Ed. Thank you. So, I mean, in terms of budget, so the ICB, the board, replaces the clinical commissioning group. So they were the people who got the big wad of cash from central government to spend on NHS services. So the ICB will still get that. I don't understand the finances of where that budget gets pooled with the, you know, adult social care budget of the county council and our Healthy Lives budgets. I don't think it's specified anywhere where all this will be funded from. Absolutely. So I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question about direction.
I'll just look for that in the report.
while we're waiting, do you want to look at the other questions? Or?
Yeah, so I mean, outsourcing, that's not something that has been brought up or discussed. I think that's obviously, from my view, I want to do as little of that as possible. I appreciate that occasionally it is necessary to get rid of a backlog or something, but obviously any discussions that I'm part of, I would like to see that all work being done by properly employed people within the council or the NHS. I don't think I can really, but I can't promise you that here today. And then Dan Leveson, you just managed to get his CV, excellent.
So no, I think to be clear, the strategy is not about the kind of the structures of the NHS from the point of view of how things are delivered, and unfortunately, it hasn't offered us an opportunity to say how much money should be invested in its delivery either. It is literally about the types of things that the sort of priority areas of focus. So that's essentially what it's about the delivery of health from the point of view of priorities. Dan Leveson, I can tell you, because his LinkedIn account tells me that his background, he was clearly involved in a lot of overseas stuff, worked at Oxfam for best part of 5 years, up to 2009, and then since then has worked in the NHS in a succession of more and more senior roles.
Can I follow up on that? So in terms of his responsibility being to the NHS trusts, or I mean, that's sort of the most pertinent point there about him, is not so much his CV, but who he's answerable to, I guess.
He's answerable to the NHS. Yes, he's there as they have got 3 place directors for each of the 3 counties, effectively that Bob covers. Their role is one of engagement with non-NHS organisations like the local authorities and others, but he is employed by the NHS. Yeah.
Councillor Arshad, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. I found this report very interesting. The fact that you've collated quite a lot of information with regards to ethnic minority communities among different immigrants who've travelled and live in the country and local residents. But something was occurring to me while we were speaking, which is why I requested further time, was the fact that if we know that certain communities are more affected in health conditions such as wherever they are, you've listed on this report, I can see, I can read them all out. But if we know that those communities, then would it not make sense to approach those specific communities in a more integrated, targeted approach? Councillor Chris Jarvis has also mentioned similar, that these are the restraints that are on, because I think also it's not, although minorities and different communities make that difference in that their suffering might be more, which it is, and we've seen reports that have factualized that. But my point is, if we target those audiences more in your report going forward, and how we would achieve that would come. So my point is really, to increase that.
Really good point. Love it. And I think a lot of work is going on that. A lot of work is going on targeted outreach. Things like our community champions are doing that. I think there are lots of programs with GPs to reach out to particular groups who are at risk of particular things. So,
can I just follow up on that, Chair? You know what it is? There's other groups like GLOGY is coming up a lot. I don't know if that's from Fusion. Is it called GLOGY? It's been in the local food banks area in East Oxford. They've been going around different groups. I think it's Sophia led perhaps. And so what it focuses on is portion size. It focuses on how to de-stress. Now, given that we're having in this global crisis where there's a shortage of food and paying rents and bills rising, of course, there's increased uncertainty for everyday households. So most people are affected. And as a result of these daily stresses, and given that there's different scenarios of people who are elderly may not have enough, or there's single parent mothers, or, you know, all of the different, and by the time you bring it down to demographics and socioeconomics, and you see, if we can highlight which groups need more, maybe we should apply a more integrated, targeted approach in accessing, like you did with the letters through the post. But if this is something that you can look into, I think that would be quite impactful.
There's the organisation called Health Watch, who are really good at going out and talking to people who don't usually get talked to. We've had some really good reports from them who have come to the Health Improvement Board, and they are an integral part of the Integrated Care Partnership. So they're one of the groups on board. So I think that is one good way of getting into things, but the more we can hear about, the better. Great, so I'll have a look at what GLOGI is. I mean, the food and food poverty, just slightly as an aside, but there's a separate strand of work going on with the Food Action Working Group for the that I'm part of within my City Council role, that is looking at the many different aspects of tackling that. And that also in that Food Action Working Group, we have things like the OX4 Food Crew, which includes Syrian sisters and all sorts of things. So there's quite a lot of work going on aside from the ICS to do with that.
I do really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. It's incredible, you know, obviously because we're in Scrutiny, I'm just trying to highlight the area where we can improve the good work that you're doing with my colleagues today. And I think the other thing I just wanted to quickly mention was around, so in terms of the last 3 years, a lot of people through lockdown have spent a long time in their homes. And they say that the most polluted place is actually your home. So there may be people, because of poverty, are not able to improve carpet cleaning, especially for people with social care who are sick and have not means. And I think that is an area we need to gives poor quality of health and increases that. You know, maybe going into more messaging through our council platform on what households can be doing to exercise and how often they should be cleaning, and how perhaps we can improve solar energy or initiatives from Oxfordshire County Council as well as City Council to apply more funding for, like, for example, we did, I think there was something on outdoor and internal insulation for heat control. So maybe we can tie in that sort of area as well, like if it can improve somebody's health. But the budgets are so small, because when you look at houses, what work does need to be done is over the grant, and therefore the grant gets rejected. So in these areas need to be looked into how we can improve it. If you could take that forward, that would be really helpful as well.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting. Indoor air quality is just starting to come up onto people's radars. Actually, we've all been worried about outdoor air quality for years, but actually it's indoor air quality where you are for much more of the time than that. I think, I guess that's not actually reflected in any of the 18 priorities here, but it's, maybe that's something that we need to get into the action plan that's going to sit underneath this, at least as well. Yes, did you want to add anything?
Yes, just, I mean, really welcoming the points you make, Councillor Arshad. I mean, essentially, this is what we're saying as a tier 2 local authority, along with the other district councils, to be clear, to both the county council and to the NHS, which is that if you want to be effective in terms, particularly those first 2 of those priorities, as Councillor Upton mentioned, the health prevention and the tackling health inequalities, you've got to integrate the delivery of that work with the work that we do as a council. And you're absolutely right. In terms of being able to target things at particular groups and community and so forth, we're better placed than the kind of, the sort of the large scale NHS often will be. And so we are very, very interested to see that we can operate in a more integrated way. Hence, I mentioned those visits, those sort of fairly high level visits that have taken place quite recently. And that's really about, seeing if we can actually get some substance behind, what are often just warm words on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. That does sound like fodder for a recommendation, doesn't it? I know we already have priority 4 about action to address social, economic and environmental factors makes mention of air quality, but the text very much is sort of in the context of sort of traffic emissions, the air quality on your street for the most part. So yes, so raise it that the council should keep banging on about indoor air quality and its effect on people's health. Would seem like a valuable thing. The committee is in agreement. Councillor Hunt, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say from the business thing we were looking at, actually, ventilation is a word that should be included in everything now. I mean, I was going to mention this in context of the swimming pools, how no one's going to swim indoors now if they're not properly ventilated, But similarly, I think in terms of, you can open a window and actually ventilation is key. The other thing, I think, just in terms of environmental issues, I think probably green spaces and keeping active, I won't go into, but what we also know about cancers, which are on the increase, are environmental cancers, and cancers in the young are massively increasing, massively. And those are environmental cancers, which have got to do with, chemicals in your environment, which does actually go back to this issue of what we're doing to our environment in terms of chemicals and not building on green spaces, which is something I was going to bring up, but perhaps this isn't relevant here. But how, obviously, as a city council, we must make sure that we are not building on any of our community green spaces. I mean, that just has to be a complete kind of red line now, because there's a number of things which are being, identified for building on which shouldn't be. And I just think that has to stop.
That might be slightly beyond the scope of the integrated care strategy, but thank you.
Definitely one for the previous agenda item, I'm afraid. That I did have one on that, but I thought I might know what answer I'd get if I was to bring up Bertie Park. Councillor Jarvis, I know you've been waving a hand for a bit.
I'm certain the answer to my question is going to be it's beyond the scope of the integrated care strategy, so I'll leave it.
Fair enough. Do we have any other questions to raise? I don't see any, in which case, yes. Well, yeah, no, we do. Sorry, yes. Well, unless, sorry, do you mean you want to add another one? Okay, yes. So the recommendations I'm already aware of are, I should have written them down. We had vaping, we had vaccine disinformation, and we had indoor air quality, which we should probably add an asterisk to that, relating to whatever role building standards and or planning have to that, since that's the kind of thing which we would consider in that context.
Active outreach, going and all communities, targeted communities.
Is that something we've already got in there, or is that something we'd want to?
Sorry. Right at the beginning of this document, that are the priorities. It says, so there we go. Yeah, smoking and tobacco consumption rates are high in some ethnic minority communities and among immigrants from countries where tobacco regulation and cultural approaches used are use are different from UK?
In terms of what I picked up of recommendations and how those various aspects was social and economic, air quality, impact on people's health, bleed through can be targeted in the action plan going forward and how they can be emphasised by the council in its discussions. So I think they could all of them can be summed up in one.
Sounds good to me. Cool, fantastic. Any more for any more? Yes, sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted, if we're talking about suggested recommendations, I did want to go back to the sort of budget for the board, and obviously in regards to knowing what it can achieve, it would just be good to know how it's what kind of money is behind this, and if it can be put as a recommendation, I would favour it so that we could understand what the potential is really of this, of the ICB.
I guess this would be a recommendation to inform, to report on it rather than something the ICP should do. But
obviously we can't force them.
So what's sorry, I'm slightly at sea here. So obviously we know the ICB replaced the CCG and inherits the.
I'm just talking about as a local authority, understanding what the potential and the budget of it is in terms of the aims that we've seen, and obviously we've got new suggested aims as well. So that's what I was.
So like, is there new money to do the sort of social aspects of things outside of what the CCG's previous activities?
Yeah, or if it's a case of it's just exactly the same budget, I don't know what that is at all. I have no idea. So.
Okay, so I think they're not going to start putting numbers into this strategy that aren't there already. And we're not going to be setting new bits of the City Council's budget through this either. So I think probably the best we can do to try and answer your questions is to sort of come back to you separately outside of this with information that we can get about what the budget of the ICB is. Do that, yeah.
Okay, so so phrasing wise, this would look something along the lines of to seek clarity as to what relevant funding streams would be to achieve the aims set out here, particularly I suppose those where the party that is executing is not the former CCG, the activities that would be expected of councils and things like that, especially when it's talking about things that relate to sort of planning and design and transport and so on. These are clearly things which are executed outside of the former CCG and which perhaps we're expected to simply undertake with existing money, perhaps which funding streams are intended to be made available for. That's pretty long as a recommendation, but you see what I mean, to seek clarity to those ends. Does that basically make sense?
So is it a recommendation to cabinet? Is it a recommendation to cabinet on this report that it provides that, or is it a request to cabinet that council provides that information?
Yeah, but I guess the information would come from the ICB because you meet on rotation, aren't you? And as representative of the council, you meet with the local ICB. So presumably that's the sort of information that you can ask for in those meetings.
Yes, I guess we can ask for it. I mean, I think the point of the ICB is to, they have, the NHS has its budget, we have our budget. It's to make us all, just work better together. I don't think they're going to suddenly turn up with more money to fund things that the council does, but it's for for us just to work better with them, so that we're doing things that are useful to them, they're doing things that are useful to us, etc.
Okay, I hope we've got enough clarity to phrase something there. There'll be a circulation of emails as well. All right, any more for any more? Otherwise, I suggest we move on to our third item. So thank you very much, Councillor Upton. Thank you very much, Mish. And we are now joined by ... He hits back on his laptop, he logs in again. We are now joined by Councillor Turner, and we also have I've got Nigel Kennedy written down here, but he's clearly changed. But thank you very much, Councillor Turner, and we've also got Anna Winship joining us on Zoom to talk about the integrated performance report. Councillor Turner, would you like to kick us off to introduce the item?
Yeah, thanks very much, colleagues. It's been interesting listening to the rest of the meeting. Particularly enjoyed the debate about the background of the ICS representative. I think he's active in local football, and I'm not sure he's a big admirer of my refereeing skills. But anyway, there we go, the smashing guy. I've got the integrated performance report to bring forward tonight. You'll note it's just for Cabinet. There are no budget changes being proposed for this one, which is why a recommendation would go to Council. There's a point to note about our change to the timescale for our insurance contract. I think the position is that unfortunately we're looking on the general fund revenue first of all at some negative variation, so an overspend or an underachievement of income depending how you choose to look at it. Probably still within margin of error territory, and also you'll note that our position is aided by the delayed payment of last year's ODS dividend, but unfortunately the late payment of this year's dividend, which is greater, means that overall that's a net negative. The finance panel, I know, has been receiving reports and discussing quite a lot of the position in respect of corporate property rents. That's something as well which we've reprofiled for this year's MTFS, and we're doing absolutely everything we can to do the right sort of recovery for the Council's financial position. Worth noting, of course, that our hands were tied for a significant period of time, and we couldn't pursue enforcement proceedings for certain periods during the pandemic. So that's where we are. On the HRA, there is also an adverse variance. There are ups and downs there as well. Members, I might have been caught by the increased repairs expenditure. A lot of that due to building cost inflation, which of course is really quite profound, and which we're seeing across a number of other projects as well. And storm damage defencing is another area which is giving us a concern. The third one, of course, which we look at is the capital programme. We have a remarkable capital programme as a district council. Again, there are some areas of slippage, sometimes particularly where, for example, it relates to loans for housing development. I think we have to recognise we are in a world where there are uncertainties to do with development. There may be, for example, statutory services where you wait for an assessment. There may be delays due to other agencies, which are beyond our control, and indeed beyond the control of OX Place, our own housing company and partner. So those, we try and profile it right, but sometimes it isn't going to be right, and that's a fact of life. There will also be times where we need to reappraise schemes. We need to maybe drive the costs down. We need to just double check that we are still committed to schemes where values have risen, and that's again, unfortunately, where costs have risen. That's again, unfortunately, something which we encounter increasingly. But what we are trying to do as well is address any optimism bias in our capital programme, so that we can keep the kind of controllable slippage, if you like, to a minimum. Performance points are noted here, and spring no surprises. I'd like to pass over to Anna for any technical input that she wishes to provide, or indeed any other comments that I've missed, and then we're both happy, I think, to take any questions.
Hi, thank you. I don't have anything additional to say. I think you've covered it extremely well. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you both very much for the introduction. Could I see hands for anybody who'd like to ask a question on this one? Thank goodness, I thought we were about to have 0, in which case I would have to get my time machine until I had to go to bed 2 hours ago. Councillor Pegg, please kick us off.
Yes, I just wanted to ask sort of 2 separate bits. One was on a lot of the savings in there are noted because it's unfilled vacancies. I think that's noted quite a few times. So I wondered what the impact of that has been on services. And then on the section where it notes where various efficiencies have been made, it's quite brief in sort of setting out what they are, and I'm sure they've been set out in other papers and other places, but just for clarity here, what were the cuts made around rough sleeping strategies and around voluntary sector grants?
Shall I have a go at answering those, Chair? I'm guessing that's a yes. So, and apologies, Anna may want to come in as well. So, on the savings, yeah, I mean, so this is revisiting what was agreed by the council in its budget. So starting with the second question first, on rough sleeping, I think that was more.
Ed, sorry, I have to interrupt you. We were kicked out of the Zoom meeting, so you'll have to start. You will have to start your answer again, I'm afraid, from the beginning of Councillor Pegg's question. Sorry.
Right. No, don't worry. Sorry. No, it all went terribly quiet. That explains it. So it wasn't like you at all, Chair. So yeah, okay. I'll do it in the right order this time. I was answering the wrong order. So on the staffing side of things, I mean, we try and we debated this a bit in the council budget meeting actually as well, with the inclusion of a vacancy factor. I mean, you try and fill posts as quickly as you can. Sometimes when people leave, there's a hiatus and it's disruptive. There's been a specific issue in some areas where we've struggled to recruit. Again, the councillors will be aware that in a couple of areas we're then looking to pay an extra premium on salaries. There, of course, you then sometimes end up having to bring in specialist locum staff, which then adds to a cost. But yeah, equally, I suppose one way of checking the impacts would be to see the performance report, and that's not looking too bad. So I think staff have done a decent job covering. I think more than that, we probably need to drill down into particular areas and have a conversation with service heads about whether they have anything to add on that. A couple of areas of budget reduction, which the council agreed in previous budgets. So rough sleeping, from memory, was about sharing costs differently with partners. And in particular, from memory, also bringing in additional government funding. I mean, we, I think, spend unusually large sums for district council on trying to tackle rough sleeping, and rightly so. It's a real area of priority for us. So it certainly wasn't about reducing services. I think it was about bringing more partners on board. And the other one mentioned community grants. I mean, that's correct. The council took a decision to slightly reduce the size of its community grants portfolio. There was also then a change to the way the grants were handled, and scrutiny was a full part of that process. So, I have to say the feedback I've had with the current grants model has been okay. Perhaps, and reasonably positive, but of course, it's one of those areas as well as the council where, frankly, we still maintain a very substantial community grant funding pot, and if we, in circumstances where other areas of funding are being cut, there are more people clearly turning to us for assistance.
Thank you very much. Could I see hands of people with questions? Councillor Jarvis, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I have. I'm interested in the variance around corporate property, specifically in relation to the reallocation of income for a regeneration project from revenue to capital. And I guess I have a series of questions that follow on from each other on that. So I guess the first question is why is it that particular project had to be reallocated from revenue to capital? The second question is, could that have been foreseen that the income would have to be allocated in that way? And therefore, the third question is, why wasn't that budgeted in that way initially? And the fourth question is there a general risk that some of our regeneration income in the future is going to be budgeted as revenue and they have to be reallocated as capital? And then I have a second question, which is about energy, which has been a consistent theme in these quarterly performance reports for a while now, and obviously is quite a substantial risk area in terms of the council's finances. And so there's a figure in here, I don't have it to hand, but there's a figure in here as to a best estimate as to energy costs, utility costs rather. I guess what I'd like to know is, like, do we have a worst case scenario in terms of utility costs, in terms of the volatility in the market and where things are going? Because that best estimate, as is kind of laid out, is based on assumptions, but also based on assumptions that are, I guess, based on the information that we have now in a volatile market. So do we have a sense of what the worst case scenario could be and what the impact that could have on finances would be?
Just to give Anna forewarning, I think she may need to excuse me, come in on the change from revenue to capital in relation to one of the investment schemes. That's not an area that I would expect members to be kind of worksmithing what officers do. Clearly, there are accounting rules which have to be applied. In the case of the scheme in question, it's probably a relatively unusual model, and I guess officers had to give some consideration about the right thing to do. I would just say, though, of course, in a position where you have some revenue funding of capital, then below the line, it shouldn't make a lot of difference. Yeah, there are circumstances when it could make a difference, but in this case, it shouldn't. Just on the second one, utility costs. So the figure, yeah, at the moment, the pressure is recorded as it's in paragraph 7 of the report, £710,000 as utility cost pressure. It's being kept updated. I mean, in terms of best and worst case scenarios, I'm not sure I've got that. Might be worth, and we could certainly discuss that with Mish Tuller, who leads on that for the council. There are a couple of things I would say. One is that it's for this sort of reason we need to keep a reasonable level of reserves and balances as a council, because clearly, the lower your level of reserves, the more exposed you are to that sort of thing. And secondly, an area I'm particularly concerned about actually is around leisure centres, and the fact that they were willfully and in my view quite wrongly excluded from the latest energy assistance scheme by the government is a real concern, of course, for a city which has a number of leisure centres. So, that's clearly an area which is a particular live interest. But Annie, you may want to comment a bit on the capital revenue and regeneration scheme project.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. As you quite outlined, it's quite a technical financial accounting issue that cropped up at the very end of the financial year, when we actually got into the detail of the actual financial accounting for it. So it wasn't foreseen previously to that point, up until that point. So we had to, as Ed said, it didn't really make a massive impact on the bottom line, but we did have to just sort of kind of rethink our thinking to try and mitigate that risk going forward. Obviously, you always learn from what's happened before you. So we are making sure that we are considering all the potential different options that might crop up from all of the development schemes that we're looking at, so that we can try and mitigate anything going forward.
Just to follow up on that last point, and I think Chris J asked about this to a degree as well, is the factor about this particular project that caused that reaccounting to happen. And I acknowledge the point that, like, from a cash flow perspective, this doesn't make any difference, but it does make a difference from the point of view of accounting on future budgets and what we can revenue expenditure we can justify to produce a balanced budget. So I wonder, is that factor common to any other schemes which we have present or future? Is it something we'd expect to be visiting us again in those future projects and making impact on future ability to justify revenue expenditure, or is it very particular to this one project?
Yes, certainly nothing that is on the table, so to speak, of our projects at the moment will be impacted by this technicality. and anything coming forward will be making sure we've covered all bases.
Okay, thank you very much. I saw a hand from Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I mean, it was just very specific actually, so perhaps too specific, but when in the instance of the Cave Street development, you say the business, there will have to be an updated business, and an updated business case may be required. I just wondered what that meant and whether there has, there's ever been a scenario where, given the rising costs, that obviously the developer's locked into a project such as this, but has there ever been an instance where actually now a developer walks away from a project because, as you've said, significant viability risk? Who's shouldering that?
So, I mean, this is our project, and what this is getting at is at the time we went out to procurement, at the time we designed our scheme, we designed a particular scheme which would cost a certain amount of money, would bring in a certain amount of income. The problem that was sort of what I was alluding to in my introductory remarks. If a scheme ends up costing more money, but you probably aren't expecting to get more income, then you may need to have another look and see what, whether there's anything that you need to change about the scheme. So, in this case, it became a bigger project, a bigger scheme. Might we, for example, need to pare it back? I hope we don't. And the other thing which we would try and do in any case is reduce costs down, the buzzword of value engineering, and we'll try and do that. But ultimately, we might need to look at doing something a bit differently with that sort of scheme. And in terms of, it's an interesting question actually about people walking away from contracts. I mean, there are clearly sectors of the economy that are very, very exposed at this time. I think one of the things which we found is that we have to construct contracts differently, and that more risk is having to be shared with the local authority in terms of the risk from cost inflation, rather than simply being borne by the contractor. So it's more at the start of proceedings when you are looking to procure a piece of work, the council has to share some of the risk for building cost inflation, for example, rather than being able to nail it all down from our end, and then the risk being borne by the contractor. That's my layperson's understanding of it, if you like.
Oh, thank you both very much. Do we have any other questions in the room? I don't see any hands here, so I've got a few quick ones. Number one, in the context of the HRA and ODS expenditure, we mentioned suspending some areas of work. Could you clarify what areas of work those are, and what sort of time period of suspension we're talking about?
Yeah, sorry, Chris, can you just point me to the right paragraph? Make sure I'm talking about the right area.
I'll just have to Control F that 1 second. I'll ask you one of my other ones whilst I yes, please, go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, sorry, it's paragraph 10.
Yeah.
Page 159.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. So, I mean, there are some areas of work with ODS where there's a finite budget each year. And so, for example, we've got a pot of money which is used to do the decorations, and there's a limited amount that can be done. And then once that budget is spent, then you start offering it up at the start of next financial year instead. And so I think it's of that order where that would apply. We're not looking at reducing services wholesale or anything like that. There's, as you've seen, there are some works which can be charged to capital, so that's helpful. And there's a specific sentence in there on fencing. I mean, for what it's worth, it's something we've been, I think, weighing up really. The demands on fencing have increased quite significantly, but we know that it's a service which is very much appreciated by our tenants. So that's one which we're trying to balance. I mean, maybe one other bit of colour, which it might be helpful to give people on this. We are going to take a high-level strategic look at the HRA, specifically focused on capital. But naturally, revenue and capital are linked, and so I don't want it to be too sharply divided, because at the end of the day, we have some significant objectives we want to deliver in terms of new build affordable housing. So we want more council houses. We've got some significant objectives we want to deliver in terms of retrofitting our stock and increasing energy efficiency. And we've also got the the revenue spend on services, on wider estate regeneration, and indeed on repairs and maintenance. And unfortunately, our HRA wouldn't be able to meet all of our ambitions across all of those as much as we'd like. So there are choices to be made. But I'm very keen that rather than just kind of happening by default, those issues are surfaced to members for a decision. And so, and necessarily, of course, with all of this, the world keeps changing. I would hope that maybe some retrofitting costs will come down over time, for example, so we might be able to do more. That's what I'd hope. But equally, environment of increased building cost inflation, some measures will end up costing more money, and so that's the reason why we need to appraise it. So some short-term cost controls, of course, Chris, which you picked up on, but I think also the bigger thing we need to keep in mind is the kind of big picture strategic budget planning on this.
Thank you. So you've given some examples of areas of work there which would be fairly harmless, to suspend, and of course we hope that they all are that would need to be suspended. But I mean, given that it's a vague phrasing which could vary from being utterly harmless to being a large problem, I'd be inclined to recommend, if the committee was happy to do so, that should be elaborated, and those areas of work that are under consideration should be enumerated. Are people happy that we should request that information? I see nods around the table. Moving on to question 2, I'm now onto the KPIs, the performance indicators. There's one which is about online forms, and I suppose specifically in the context of diverting what was call centre traffic into online completion, which seems like a valuable performance indicator, but which is marked as TBC and under review. I just wondered why that one was knocked off as a KPI.
I'm afraid I'm not across that, Chris. I don't know if Anna's got any ideas.
I don't know 100%, but it's potentially because we are implementing a new system for our online forms. So I presume potentially it was suspended whilst we embed that new system, but I will certainly take that away. I'm assuming you're taking that from Appendix D, are you?
Yes, that's right. It is row 2 in Appendix D.
I'll take that away as a specific question and get
sure thing, yeah. And the other one is just an English language thing. Is row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 describes people supported into work placements, apprenticeships, training, or back into employment with you so far, leading to high growth jobs in the city. I honestly don't know what you mean by a high growth job, so I'd appreciate if you could clarify what we're aiming to do there.
Okay, again, I will take that one away for you.
Fair enough. Okay,
Chris, through you.
Yes.
I mean, on that, it's a good spot. I think probably it's an explanation of the good that might be done if you have people entering employment or an apprenticeship, that sort of thing. But fair comment. We'll take that away and check the wording for you.
Anybody else want to come in on anything on the performance report? I don't see it. I see people. I see thought balloons with dinner. But not hands with questions. Right. In that case, Richard, would you mind summing up where we are on recommendations? I think probably just one.
Yeah, it's just the one about elaboration and areas of work under consideration should be enumerated. And so, yeah, I shall form something and cast it under your beady eye.
Sounds good. I will dust off the old beady eyes for usage later this week. All right, in that case, then I think we are done. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Turner. Sorry you drew the short straw for being in last position. And thank you very much indeed, Anna. And similarly, apologies for the late hour.
No, thank you very much. Thanks.
Cheers. Pleasure as always. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right then, we are down then to the closing admin. When it comes to reports back, we just have the two recommendations, the covered market and gender neutral lavatories, which is received constructively, which is good. And also the one about the disciplinary policy. Yes, the disciplinary policy. And when elected members can be involved in appeals, and we got some clarification there. I won't read it out, but there is clarification in the docs, which is good. Should that unpleasant eventuality come to pass, then we'll know where we are. Future meetings. So notionally, yeah, we're on for the 4th of April. We'll see if the cabinet agenda moves around. I would probably expect that not to happen, but keep it in your calendars for now. About 2 weeks out or so, we'll make that into a hard decision. But there will be the Climate Environment Panel will be meeting in a few days, which is great to see that getting underway. And we got finance and performance in March, and then housing and homelessness and companies in late April. So that is it for now. Thank you all very much for coming. Have a very nice evening and see you next time.